Hi there, this is Marnie Melrose, also known as Midas Marnie, and I have two very special guests with me today, Brian Robertson of Holacracy, and I was down at the Conscious Capitalism conference just recently, and I had seen, Brian through the years, and I was like, hey, and I walked up to him and started chatting with him, and I found out that he was interested in Bitcoin. And I was very excited about that because I think it could be really interesting to kind of discover and have a discussion about Bitcoin and the whole decentralization bit with holacracy and how they might actually work together. And through my travels, ended up asking him to come on the show, and then I heard from our friends at the World Crypto Network that Chris was really interested in holacracy as well. So I have Chris from Feathercoin here. And, Chris is very interested in all of that, and we're going to just have a real quick discussion. But first, we're going to start off with Brian and ask him, how did he first get involved with Bitcoin? And what was it that really got you, Brian?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a that's a really hard question to answer. There's so much. It is really at the intersection of a lot of different passions for me. I have a really deep kind of a closet economist. It's not the work I do. It's not my background and my training, but I love it. I devour as much as I can, and especially the Austrian school and tradition and all the different threads from that. And I have been just for years fascinated by that and by looking at our broader economy through that lens. And then also on the political side, some of the works, if you're familiar with Murray Rothbard, has been a big influence on me and my thinking. And anyway, all of that coupled with my own work in holacracy, looking at power and how power works in organizations and how to shift that a bit to a different paradigm. When I look at all that together, and then I kind of saw the emergence of Bitcoin, and it must have first crossed my radar. Must have been a couple of years ago, somewhere in that ballpark. I got really excited. The more I dug in and studied it, it's just the implications of it were just huge. I love who's that? The venture capitalist that mentioned what it was, personal computer in the 70s or 80s. He said the internet in the 90s.
Mark Andreessen. Yeah, Mark.
Yes, that's him.
From original Mozilla browser.
That's right. Yep. And in the 2010s, it's Bitcoin, and that just resonated with me a lot from what I see as the revolutionary capacity of this technology. So really cool.
We must be the same age, I guess.
What was that?
I said we must be the same age because we resonated with that.
Yeah, it grabbed me. And I see it, the implications are huge for me, and the paradigm under it is so related to the rest of my work, the rest of my view of the economy and our world and all that, the underlying paradigm that it enables, that it expresses with this distributed, trustless system. I've often commented in organizations, if you want to inspire trust, the worst thing you can do is require it. If you want an organization where everyone's trusting of each other, what you need to do is obsolete the need for trust, and you'll get lots of it. So it's just, there's so many connections and threads. I don't even know where to start. It's really cool.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, how about we take a quick segue to Chris and ask him the same question, Chris. How did you get involved with Bitcoin? I know that you've been around with Bitcoin for a while, and what was it that really caught you? And then kind of follow that up with, what was it about holacracy? Where did you see that connection?
So I used to code when I was a kid. My dad, I was very fortunate to have a father who was a software developer, and he taught me how to code from a very early age. I didn't take to it as a profession, so I took a massive hiatus for like 10 years. But I was always interested in cryptography. I would always kind of ruminate and come up with ideas for different things. I loved public key cryptography in particular. I never was, I wasn't a genius enough to come up with Bitcoin, but then when I saw it about 2011, I think, or maybe 12, someone showed me what this thing was on his computer, And I said, but that's it there and then. I said, that's the end of money as we understand it. Like, I think this is really, really cool. Unfortunately for me at the time, I had a lot else going on in my life, and I kind of ignored it for a while. And I sort of had my eye on it. And my friend Leo, he kept talking about it. He kept talking about it. So it was always in the back of my mind. And it wasn't really until early last year that I started to get more vocal. As I saw more journalists come into the space and started spreading rumors and misinformation, I got a bit angry, and I'm quite active on Twitter. So I started calling out some journalists on some factual errors. And then I got sucked in. And so then I kind of started buying some Bitcoin to kind of experiment with it. And then I ended up joining Feathercoin very early on in their stages, and I became one of their co-founders, because what I liked about what Feathercoin did is they just focused on the local nature of the currency. I always saw Bitcoin as a local currency because that's where the real power lies. It lies with the people that are at the coalface. I didn't really see it as a way of overthrowing government. I don't understand this kind of irony within the Bitcoin movement generally, to be on the one hand be anti-centralization, on the other hand want Bitcoin to be the global reserve currency. That kind of doesn't make sense to me. So I was really more keen actually on how these blockchains, I saw the movement fundamentally as the blockchain. I saw the open source nature of the project to be its most important feature. And so I kind of got into Bitcoin that way. And actually, I don't just shout for Feathercoin. I shout for every honest attempt at a blockchain technology out there. It's just that Feathercoin was where I chose to do it. I mean, smaller groups tend to favor minority voices. With Feathercoin, we answered the question of how do you scale this thing without it turning into trolls and lolcats, right? How do you get, like with the Reddit Bitcoin subreddit, with Bitcoin Talk Forum, it's just a cesspit. If you go in there, it's very inhospitable, and it's very difficult for individuals to feel like they can have some impact, which is what people want. They want to feel like they've got some autonomy, some self-mastery, particularly our generation, Generation Y, when we kind of grew up with all those TV shows and all those superheroes when we were young. That's kind of what we kind of grew up expecting. And so to relate it to a Holacracy, I heard about it through Twitter, and actually not that long ago, someone tweeted at me about this thing, because I think I was bemoaning teams and how the tragedy of the commons, the way that people don't always pick up tasks. And I've always struggled. I used to work in the film industry, and I actually really enjoyed it because every day was a new day. Every film you worked on was a new startup, right? And so you never worked with the same team of people twice. That you would work for 6 to 8 months on a set, and then you'd move on to the next set and you'd move on. And I really liked the challenge and the buzz of it. But when I kind of left the film industry about 4 years ago and I started getting into the startup world, I realized just how awful these startups are in terms of their management. The bosses are very inexperienced. These are just guys that thought they knew how to run things and left an old company and started a new one. They set these weird arbitrary deadlines. They're not focused. And most of all, they don't even have a purpose. Most startups spend at least a year trying to work out what they're for. And usually the exit strategy is nothing more than we'll sell the data onto Google, right? They look at Y Combinator, they look at all the startups coming into these big incubators, they copy the idea, do it in a different region, and then their exit strategy is they'll just sell out to some bigger player. So I kind of got very frustrated with it. I still do. I'm probably going to voice some of those frustrations on this show, just because I think the tensions need to be sensed and aired. But yeah, so when I started looking into Holacracy, I kind of Googled it as I do and watched some of the videos with you, Brian. I was like, this is some really good insights. And I come from like a Scrum kind of background, like Agile, Mike Cohn, people like that. And I really like the way that those put the customer at the center. But what they don't do very well is talk about how the team works together, because you're either learning about the team or you're learning about the product. And those all seem to be very good at telling you how to learn about the product. They don't tell you how to learn about the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, that's fabulous. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And, we kind of come a little bit from a similar background. I used to do C++ programming when I was really young, but I figured, a life of pizza, beer, and coffee really wasn't the life I wanted to live. I wanted to live at the beach, and I wanted to do yoga, and that's the life I wanted to live. But I ended up, implementing, and I've helped, now 245 companies implement CRM systems into their companies. And it was a couple of years ago, Brian, that I watched your one of the earlier videos about and you were talking about flying the plane and the sensors on the plane. And I started just from that one short little video. I think it was like, 15 minutes long, something like that. It was pretty short. But I got something from that, and I've been using that in every piece of the design of, when I'm working with a company and talking to them about, the different pieces, right, and being aware of and listening to those different pieces. I'd love you to share a little bit about that, because that for me was just key.
Yeah, happy to. Amazing what you learn when you nearly crash an aircraft. That was a personal story you're referring to. I have a private pilot's license, and when I was first learning to fly, I had a pretty bad situation. I was actually still a student pilot. It was my first cross-country solo flight, so I'm flying hundreds of miles away, no instructor for the first time. And on my way back, the low voltage light comes on my instrument panel, and I didn't know what that meant. They don't teach you much about the hardware. I barely know how to fly, so I'm tapping the light. That's not doing anything. So eventually, I decide to just ignore it. I figure, you know what? It can't be that bad, right? It's only one instrument. I looked at all my other instruments. My altimeter's fine. My airspeed's fine. And everything else is fine. So I ignore this one instrument, the low voltage light. And that was a really bad idea. I nearly crashed the plane. It was not good. That low voltage light is sensing something, of course, that no other instrument is sensing. And at the time, I was building and running a software company that I'm an entrepreneur. I was growing my software team, and I realized that this is exactly what I do in my company. We're all instruments. We all sense things on behalf of this organization and its purpose in the world. And often it's the one lone voice that senses something that nobody else senses. And yet you hear arguments like, well, I don't see it, as if that's a valid argument for why somebody else might not see it. I really, for me, this was a long time ago now, and it was kind of became a metaphor for me in my own journey to try to figure out how can I build an organization, and now more recently help spread this in the world, where everybody can really show up and be harnessed as a sensor for whatever it is they sense that relates to the purpose of this company. And that, in a nutshell, is how I capture one of the ultimate aims of Holacracy, which is a system for doing this in a company, is anything, any tension, as we say, any tension sensed by anyone, anywhere in the company, needs a place to go to get rapidly and reliably processed into meaningful change, if it's relevant to the purpose. And that's not many companies today are organized to really harness the capacity of each of us to be a conscious, sensing individual and experience stuff that could be better, stuff that's off, opportunities, whatever, and be able to channel that somewhere where we can act on it, evaluate it, do something differently, change something. That really became my quest, and yeah, a key story in my journey.
I think so too, yeah. And I've been just implementing that one little piece into, I implement Podio systems in the other side of my business, along with my Bitcoin evangelizing that I do now. And that's made a huge difference, to the companies that I've worked with. That one little thing really can revolutionize a company. And who you should talk to if you haven't talked to him yet is, have you talked to Vishen Lakhiani of Mind Valley?
No, not yet.
Oh, you really have to talk to him. I'll put the two of you together, because I remember a video that he did talking about his company. And yeah, I'll send you an email on it. I think you should talk to those guys. I think he'd really be open to it too. But
yeah. Well, one thing I just thought it'd be useful to add to connect it to the whole Bitcoin world, or at least some of the underlying paradigm. One of the things I learned, and the first many years of this journey for me, I didn't have the answers. I just had the question of how do we do that? How do we harness the capacity of everyone within to sense? And it's really connected to distribution of authority. You can't have sensors sensing something and expect to integrate it into the overall system unless they have clear authority to act locally. Right? If they have to go all funneling that to some centralized authority, by necessity, a whole bunch of messages get dropped. And it was one of my key insights along this journey for me. You've just got to distribute authority with the capacity to sense. And And it's got to be clear. Clarity is as important as the distribution. You need to know, if you're going to send something in a company, you need to know what authority do you have to act on it. And that authority without requiring bosses sign off and permissions from above and all this, if you don't know the authority you have to act locally, you can't be a good responder to the sense, to the stuff you sense, right? So it goes with this idea of a distributed authority system, because that also means a distributed response system. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I was just thinking about that with regards to Bitcoin and the way that could play out. Chris, do you have something to add to this idea that we're going on here?
I think I think we definitely need to be experimenting more with different types of management systems, because what Bitcoin has already started to do is it started to get like actually Alvin Toffler's term, with adhocracy, and it's kind of compatible with this idea where you'd just get spontaneous groups of people just coming together around a common cause, around a passion project, who just want to get something done. Right, and they all share a common vision, and they could be geographically centered. It could be centered around a particular idea. Like, for example, the common example I use: there are more Welsh-speaking people in Argentina than any other part of the world, apart from Wales, and that's because there's a large expat community there. Now, what we've seen a lot of the time with these projects that have emerged on places like GitHub is that what tends to happen is one person will absorb all the responsibility, end up doing all the work. It becomes effectively a do-ocracy, and the person that does all the work ends up feeling burdened and eventually stops, often before the project's completed. Mike Hearn was complaining about this phenomena at the recent Bitcoin Amsterdam conference, where he was saying a lot of the projects at Bitcoin take 12 to 18 months to complete, partly because no one's getting paid, and that issue is currently underway, is being addressed at the moment with distributed crowdfunding platforms and so on. But I think we do need to know how to get on better. I do think we need some kind of rigor and some structure so that we know what to do when. Like, we need some rules. And I think Holacracy actually has a constitution, if I'm right, Brian. I don't know how accessible it is readability-wise. I've only kind of skimmed it. But is there sort of a more user-friendly way for people to sort of break into some of the basics?
Yeah, the Constitution, trying to learn Holacracy by reading that is kind of like trying to learn to drive by reading the owner's manual of your car. It's a little too technical. Or like any complex game, if you're a fan of any kind of complex board game or whatever, you rarely learn those by reading the rule book. You learn by playing the game with somebody who's played it before, and the rules are just a reference. And the same is true with the Holacracy Constitution. The rules are there, which is partly what allows it to be a trustless system. You're not trusting some boss and their idea of what Holacracy is. It's written down. Anyone can go reference it and know exactly how power works in this company. It's there for everyone to see. And yet, to learn it, the best bet is to have a good coach. But there are other resources on holacracy.org. We try to do everything we can to support the do-it-yourself world. We have a software tool that's free for small teams as well that supports that. The best way to learn a game is to play with somebody who's done it before, or at least go, take a class, take a course, do something to try to learn it. The rule book's there for reference. Although it is central, and I love something you said about rules. One of the ways I describe Holacracy sometimes, it's a rule system for humans working together in anarchy. And by anarchy there, I'm using the definition from the original Greek, which doesn't mean without rules, it means without rulers or masters. And you can say that is very true with Holacracy. It's a rule system, because if we're going to work together without just a big man at the top trying to direct the whole economy of our organization, right? If we want to have something that more resembles a market, more resembles a collection of humans each doing our thing, our work in the world, we need some rules to wrap it together and to align our efforts and to break down how we're going to control whatever we have to control as a group. You need rules for that if you don't want rulers. And so Holacracy, a rule system for living together in anarchy.
Reminds me.
And that really goes along with Bitcoin too, because if you look at the Bitcoin mining system, right, is that there's a number of rules that govern the system. And this is kind of goes back to Holacracy too, is that we trust that everybody is working by the rules.
By the rules, yep.
And so that's where the trust is. The trust is in the system rather than coming from the top. The trust is in the rules, in that we know that these rules work. If everybody follows these rules, then the system's going to work well. And then the miners themselves do have some autonomy to say, no, I'm not going to accept that, or I'm going to throw that out. And then the ability to discuss with the other miners, is this a good idea? Should we put this into the blockchain? And then they have rules to govern putting it into the right? And to cut you off there, Chris, jump in.
I was going to say, it reminds me of Dave Brubeck's quote that jazz that actually has more rules than most other forms of music. It's just you don't notice them, and the reason is because the rules are contained within each individual playing the music. So it's the same in physics with the complex adaptive system theory, which says that it's separation, alignment, cohesion. So each bird doesn't know how to make a flock of birds. Each bird just knows what to do in terms of separating itself from other birds, aligning itself with the birds that are neighboring it, and then the sum of all of that equals more than it's more than the sum of its parts, essentially. And one of the things I think that's happened was we fundamentally got away from the essence of democracy, which has nothing to do with voting. Voting is just an outsourcing of power. Demos kratos actually means power to the many. Like the kratos is the power, demos means many. And fundamentally what ancient Greece, and I'm only bringing up ancient Greece, I think, because Brian brought up the etymology of anarchy, but also because I'm a big fan of classical Greece, and it's often brought up in political theories. They often sort of cite that as being like the thing to mimic if we can. One of the things that I really liked about what Plato was talking about in the Republic was getting this relationship between the sophos, the expert, and the demos, the many. The episteme and the knowledge, and the doxa, the opinion of the masses, is that you can't just run by genius alone, right? If you just have geniuses and nothing else, you end up with chaos, actually, not anarchy. You do need to kind of mediate it with the wisdom of the crowd sometimes. And I think what Bitcoin has shown us is that actually you can. It's not so much that there's more power than there used to be. I think what it was is that we willingly outsourced our power to the people above us. I think it's very convenient for us to tell a story about how it's the mean dictator and the autocrat that comes down and tells us what to do. I think secretly, deep down, I kind of want to be a bit lazy. I don't want the responsibility. I don't want to have to answer for it. And throughout history, time and time again, there have been plenty of people willing to step up to the plate and take that responsibility. But I think what happened, what the banking system showed us, is that they thought, well, look, if we can just kick this can down the road, we'll be dead long before the crimes ever get discovered. As long as I can, this is what companies do. Essentially, you're making money, saving money, and increasing your awareness. And this is the ethic of a cancer cell. Right? So what you do is on a company balance sheet, what you want to do is externalize all of your costs. A good CFO will do this. Like the classical example would be a company dumping chemical waste into a river. I know it's a bit of it's been used a lot. What happens is that if the company was forced to put those costs onto its balance sheet, it would no longer be showing a profit. But the way they're able to do it is by fudging the numbers, and what it does is pushes risk onto the rest of the world. So actually, most of these companies would actually only be breaking even if we could really see the costs. Now, no Bitcoin can ever leave the system. The Bitcoin ecosystem is perfectly well contained, and you alluded there to the power that the miners have, and the miners don't have any granular power, by the way. They can only decide which chain that they're mining on, and if someone tries to put through a change they're not happy with, they'll just continue to mine on the old chain. And actually one of the drawbacks to that can be that once a democracy gets too big, each node, each person in the democracy has less influence overall, because your influence gets diluted by new members. That's why I actually think that more blockchains is probably better, because you're going to get communities that may not agree with the 21 million. They may not agree with deflation. Actually, that's going to be one of the biggest things you're going to come up against. A lot of Keynesians who just don't agree with deflation. So I do think that people want choices, and they will want all these different blockchains. But I'm actually more interested in getting over this hurdle at the moment. What we're seeing in Bitcoin at the moment is a massive disparity between people's levels of understanding of what the technology is, and that's why you're getting all the price volatility. Bitcoin itself is rock solid. We're not. That's the problem, and that's why the price fluctuates, because people are essentially saying as much about their sentiment as they are about Bitcoin when they make a buy or a sell on an exchange. So once we get over this hurdle and people stop asking how it works and they just start asking, okay, what can this do for me? That's when I think things get interesting, because we've seen, like with the introduction of the alphabet, papyrus, the printing press, when you get a technology that can prove action at a distance, which is what a blockchain does. It proves the existence of actions far, far away. What you get are new people whose ideas get to be heard, right? It starts to become more granular and more people get a voice, and that's what I'm really interested in. I actually think that systems like Holacracy and other more sort of user-centered design systems as well, because we are a very tool-making species, are going to be essential, because otherwise you could have chaos now.
Yeah, I want to just to add to that. One of the threads you had jumped on there was the idea that how willing people are sometimes to give up their power to that authority above, the authority figure, and and it's endemic throughout history. As a species, we do that, and that's one of the main patterns that I see in my work with Holacracy when I'm coaching a company. It happens within our companies all the time. As much as people like to complain about the management, the boss, the company, whatever, they're willing participants in giving up that power too. And one of the things Holacracy does that's just, I think, so powerful for me to watch is it removes the ability to push that authority and give it up. It holds up a mirror whenever anyone tries to do that and says, there are no bosses here. There is a governance process, right, and a set of governance records, which is actually some parallels to a blockchain there. There's a set of governance records here, which is the trusted source of how power works in this company, and no boss has the authority to influence that. There's a process by which everyone has a channel to input into that. But when people are faced with that, it has a really interesting shift, and it forces people to kind of own up to their own desire to just have somebody take care of them, right? And look up to, either to play the victim or the child and look up to the parent or the authority figure, right? Those patterns are endemic, and people play both sides. They might be the child looking up to their boss to take care of them one day, and then the next they're a manager of their team and they're trying to be heroic and save everyone on their team from whatever's going on. And Holacracy just breaks through all of that and says, look, we're all actors and agents in the system. We all have a part. We all have real authority and a way to influence the authority of everyone else and the constraints on the whole system. And you no longer need these bosses to kind of be these heroic leaders, these parent figures. And so it shifts the fundamental relationship people have to power, including their own, including others, and authority in a really powerful way. And it does it not by trying to remove authority, but by actually distributing it and getting clear on what the different authority is of each actor and agent in that system, and then the trusted process to influence that overall, which has some remarkable shifts. And in the end, it's a very different way of organizing a company than what we're used to. And in the same way, when I first tell people about blockchain technology, Bitcoin, whatever, there's almost like a disbelief that we could have a system that didn't work without these centralized authorities, right? It's so outside of people's normal day-to-day experience. And yet the funny thing is, even when I talk to people that I spend some time where I met Marnie in the conscious business world, conscious capitalism community, and you'll see people that get the power of a free market and what it does, and how it distributes resources in a totally different way. They get the power of blockchain technology and what it can do, and yet within their companies still assume that we need a top-down kind of big man hierarchy directing all of the actions and organizing things. And yet we've seen from that there are other approaches to organize. And my work's all about bringing that into the walls of a company. So it's not all of the ideas we have about structuring. Everything we've learned about structuring the broader world kind of gets thrown aside when we go into a company and still see these rigid top-down hierarchies that certainly not how we try to organize most of our economies anymore. And yet you can't just throw it out. You got to have some other thing to replace it with, or you get chaos. And that's not what this is about.
Well, I'm glad that you're offering us that other, something else to pull that out and plop that back in. And, we know that very well from programming, right? Making things modular, right? Yeah. And pulling out that, like you say, that governance, that operating. And it's time to, I think it's not only time for us to update our currency system, but it's time to update the way we run things, right?
Yeah.
I think that, you know, I'm sure that the companies that you're dealing with who implement holacracy, they're very different from those bad companies that we see. You know, we're all talking about, you know, the World Banks and things like that, and the bad guys, right? What if there was a world where they were governed differently? Would that perhaps change the outcome of the way that they interact with the world if they were governed differently?
Yeah. And that's one of my, I think, big question marks is as people experience this other way of relating to their own authority, their own power, and working with others in a company, what does that do and change how they look at their day-to-day interactions in society? You know, perhaps there's some shifts just from experience that might spread outside even somebody's experience day-to-day in a company. And you know, at the same time, I think, as Chris mentioned, there's a need for experimenting, for evolving new approaches to work together. And Holacracy itself is evolving. Our Constitution is on version 4.0 right now, and it evolves from actual experience of people practicing this and trying it and figuring out what's not quite right. And then there's kind of a whole process to evolve that core rule set itself in the similar way that there's a process to evolve the core, you know, reference code base in Feathercoin or Bitcoin or any of these. So, I mean, I think it's just aligned with this broader direction we're seeing to, you know, other approaches for organizing, whatever it is we're organizing.
Yeah, I think we as a species are evolving, right, to that more, like you say, the
Some of us are.
capitalism. Well, the thing is that I do see the other side too, because like some of my clients are actually the compliance guys in Bitcoin. And so you have somebody steeped in the traditions, right, of the old world, very much so, and they haven't been, you know, we're over here, you know, in that world of consciousness, right? And so, yeah, we're like, to them, it's like we're speaking a different language, right? But the thing is that our job is not to, like, I hear a lot of, like, the libertarians, they get so angry, right? But the thing is that rather than fight against it, right? Because if you fight against it, you don't get anywhere. Rather is to, like, you know, just like BitTorrent and Bitcoin and all of these social media viral, right? The thing is to get in there like a little virus, you know, and spread yourself, but in a way that the host doesn't kick you out completely, right? And so really, that's kind of what I'm doing with, you know, the compliance guys, is getting in there and making it a softer transition, because when they see the world the way that they see it, it's like black and white, right? And consciousness, as you guys know, it's a lot more gray. It's like a way more gray. And, you know, helping them understand how it could be beneficial, I think that's really the world that I'm excited about, and so I'm happy. So, Brian, share with us how somebody might learn a little bit more, because we're getting close on our time here. How would somebody learn a little bit more about Holacracy? And I think you have like a couple of webinars coming up, one on the 25th, right?
Yeah, our free webinars are one of the great kind of just first steps, just to get into it, see what it's about. You can find a recorded one right on holacracy.org if you want to watch an older one, or join us live, and there's Q&A space. You can ask questions and all that. And yeah, our next one is June 25th. We also, for those that want a kind of a bit of a deeper dive, we do experiential taster workshops that give you an actual experiential feel for the process, or several of the key processes actually in Holacracy. That's a much better way to really get a sense of it. It's, again, kind of like learning to play a game by jumping in and playing it with somebody who's played it before, get a feel for how the game works. That's the best bet. You can find those on our website as well. We have a network of agents that do those all over the world. We do them online as well if we're not coming near you. And if you're running a company, take a taste of it. There's ourselves and others that do executive taster days where we go in and run a real executive team as if they were running with Holacracy for a couple of days. And it really gives them a deep feel for how does this compare to the way they normally go about trying to get work done. So all that you can find on the website, holacracy.org.
Awesome, awesome. I will definitely look into it more for myself. It interests me a great deal. Chris, do you have any other parting words yourself?
Have any what, sorry?
Parting words.
Parting words, yeah. I think with Bitcoin we had the code that told the computers what to do. Now I think we need the ethics to tell the people how to behave, and I focus more on behaviors than I do, you know, on anything else, because that's what interests me most about the kind of systems like I've been learning about from Brian with his Holacracy. What I'd really like, Brian, for you to do is take a look at websites like proofofexistence.com, take a look at the smart contract space, because what would be really nice is if, as an organization, I was able to minute a lot of these meetings. I was watching a video that you did on integrated decision making, which seemed really interesting. Because if you could minute that meeting, you could actually stamp those minutes into the blockchain so that they're provable, yep. And that would keep everyone honest on the team. Because one of the problems with consultants coming into companies and telling people how to do things is it's often just used as an excuse by the company to take a day off work, and they kind of go, yeah, this is really cool, but then they don't actually do it, right? So what would be really good is if you built some kind of accountability mechanism, actually build Holacracy into the blockchain technology itself to kind of keep people true.
Yeah, I'm right with you. That's I'm absolutely fascinated about the implications of smart contracts and Holacracy and the connections and blockchain. So I think our Glassfrog team, I hope, will be looking at some of that as we continue evolving our own tools to support it. And yeah, love the vision.
Good, good. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today, and I'd love to, investigate this further. Let's see where it goes and what we can do, and I'll, like I said, put you together with the guys at Mind Valley. I think they might be interested in that, and Chris, you put them together with some of the things, and, we all working together, we can create something, and that's really, there was a study done in consciousness that was really interesting. I can't remember the name of the study. I'm never good with stuff like that. But what they found, and this was done quite a long time ago in London, you know how there's that game at the fairs where you guess how many marbles are in a thing, or you guess how much a cow weighs. And they did this. Everybody individually guessed the cow's weight. And really interesting thing, they found, and they've been proven time and time again, this has been an ongoing study, that the average of everybody together was the exact weight of the cow. And so that's the thing, is that by working together, in an undistributed fashion, but communicating, we can go and create things and sometimes come up with an answer that we never could have done alone. And this is something that I have to work on every day because I'm a lone wolf. I am definitely a lone wolf, and I fight against it so hard to try not to have that aspect of my personality, carry me through. My boyfriend says, he says, by the power of Marty, and that's so true. And that's why I've been doing these interviews rather than doing what I normally do, which is just me saying what I think is going on. I'd rather, be in that space of creating something and discovering something and helping people connect. Because this is just such interesting, fascinating stuff that's going on. So I really appreciate you guys' help today. And oh, by the way, Brian, next week we have Pamela Morgan of Empowered Law. She's going to be on our show. So that might be something with regards to like contracts and things like that. She's talking about multi-sig wallets and things like that for companies as well. That might interest you. So jump on in. And Chris, thank you so much for being here today as well.
Very well.
Chris, great meeting you. Marnie, nice talking. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
See ya.
Bye.